listening to podcasts on writing is one of those things that have, it's actually majorly changed my whole approach to writing on many different levels. Hello, hi, how are ya? My name is Kristen Ray. I'm a writer, fantasy writer, and I am on a mission to write the crap out of this year, the last part of this year. One thing that I do a lot of in my cleaning time, my laundry time, my downtime, besides listening to audiobooks, is listening to podcasts on writing. To me, it's kind of like a continuing education. Listening to podcasts on writing is one of those things that have, it's actually majorly changed my whole approach to writing on many different levels. It took me from wanting to go down one road, traditional publishing, to wholeheartedly wanting to go down the self-publishing route. So anyways, I really enjoy podcasts. I think they're incredibly helpful and beneficial, especially if you can put them in your ear and be listening to them while you're doing other things. You're gleaning information from people who've been there and done that. I've listened to a ton of podcasts on writing. I'm trying to think if I've listened to any podcasts that aren't about writing. So here are my top 5 podcasts. The first 3 are the ones that to me are like, they're so good. Okay, without further ado, the first podcast that you absolutely must listen to, the Creative Pen Podcast by author Joanna Penn, and that's Penn with a double N. So she has over 760 episodes currently on her website. That's like 15 years. I want to say that's like 15 or 16 years that she's been doing this podcast. I like to call her a pioneer in the self-publishing industry. She jumped on self-publishing, I think, as soon as self-publishing became a thing. She's highly successful and knowledgeable. She's on top of like the trends of technology in the publishing industry. And she interviews other writers, people who have succeeded, people who are working with companies in the self-publishing industry, health care people to talk about health and wellness of being a writer. I mean, you name it, she's had that person on her episode. She's phenomenal. She's got a lovely voice that I could listen to forever. She's doing well, and she is sharing a plethora of information for you and I. The second podcast that you absolutely must tune into if you are a writer, specifically a self-publishing writer, is the Self-Publishing Show with Mark Dawson and James Blatch. I absolutely adore this podcast. I've been listening to it since it was the self-publishing formula years and years back. Mark Dawson, I think he started out in the traditional publishing industry, switched over to the independent. They have all kinds of guests on. Often it's people who are just starting out but have somehow figured out success. So they interview people who've been in this industry for years and years, and it's just really enjoyable to listen to. It's inspiring because as somebody who is attempting to self-publish but hasn't yet, it's always encouraging to hear people who've been where you're at just a short while ago, but then they've gotten to the point where you want to be. I think one of my goals as a writer, is to succeed enough to be like, I'm gonna go on the Self-Publishing Show podcast. That would be like, that's hashtag goals right there. I don't know if they're good goals, but they're the goals that I have. It's one of the goals I have, is I'd love to be on that podcast and be like, yes, I nailed it. This is how I did it. But these two are very dynamic together. They're funny together. They've worked together for many years. I think even preceding this show started out 2016. And so you have Mark Dawson, who is an accomplished indie author who is very successful. He's created the ads for authors. I think he's kind of like a guru as far as like the ads, figuring out the ads and how to market. That's the word I'm looking for. He's a marketing master. And then you have James Blatch, and he's the one that conducts the interviews when they talk to other authors or people in the writing industry. And it's a lot of fun because James Blatch, who by this point he's published, and I think he's working on his second novel, but when he first started interviewing, he was still drafting his first novel. And so he was asking the questions that so many of their listeners are also asking and wanting to know the answers to. And he'd be like, stop right there. I don't understand this. Let me ask for clarification. And it's the things that you as a listener are sitting there wondering too, as a newbie in the self-publishing world. I highly recommend their podcast as well. It's one of my favorites, and they're fun to listen to. Okay, the third podcast that you should absolutely tune into is K.M. Wyland's Helping Writers Become Authors. So she focuses a lot on the craft of writing. She's written a lot of self-publishing books, story arc books. She does series on structure. She has books that are helpful. I actually use, whenever I'm outlining, I use her little 10-minute outlining, how to outline your book in 10 minutes. I really enjoy her. She has so much good stuff for if you're looking to improve your craft. And I'm always looking to improve my craft as a writer. Her episodes are anywhere from 10 to 25 minutes, so they're on the shorter side, which is nice because you could fit them in like shorter amounts of time if you don't have a long car ride. She covers everything from story structure to character arc to finding ideas, outlining, finding and fixing plot holes. Basically any and everything that has to do with craft, she's covered it. And while I enjoy a podcast with rambling, I really do. I myself am a rambler, if you haven't noticed. I think hers are very scripted, and that means there's no rambling, there's no extra words. It's very to the point, very informative, very helpful. So those are the three that have remained my favorites even from 2017. So one of the other ones that is my favorite, and it is not still going. However, I have so thoroughly enjoyed this one because well, let me tell you what it is. This is the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast. The Science Fiction and Fantasy Podcast, it is no longer going. And so I realize suggesting something like that to writers is difficult because the publishing industry is constantly changing and it may not be relevant. But I do still think there's a lot of information that is relevant on that podcast. So Lindsay Baroker was one of the podcast hosts, and she then went on to do the Six Figure Authors podcast. This is a 2-for-1, okay? So hear me out. That one stopped recording in 2023, the Six Figure Authors podcast. That one was Andrea Pearson, Lindsay Baroker, and I want to say it was Joe Wallow. I'll have to double check. Sorry. But they're also talking about the realities of being an author. And I feel like the three from the Science Fiction and Fantasy podcast, none of them were super overly active on social media. None of them necessarily really liked social media, but they were still making decent money in their publishing. And I really appreciated the idea that you could make a go at it without being some TikTok sensation. Because one reality is that social media can be draining for me. Long form video like this is a lot more doable, but the Instagram, the TikTok, that kind of thing, it can be incredibly draining for me. And so it was encouraging to listen to a podcast where the hosts had ideas on how to market and run a self-publishing business that didn't require you making, 50 reels a week. Anyways, so they are not currently still making podcasts, but it is one that you can still go back and listen to the podcast. And there's still so many podcasts that I have notes of podcasts that I want to go back and listen to, because often they're interviewing people who are still writing, and they're telling their stories and kind of what they did and how they made their career. Okay, so that was a 2-for-1, but you should definitely check those out if you're a podcast person and you want some specific science fiction and fantasy geared information. Okay, the last podcast that I'm going to tell you about is The Essential Guide to Writing with Jim Thayer. I actually think his name is James Thayer. He is a traditionally published author, and his information is not really geared towards the publishing industry, but writing, the craft of writing. He has like 126 episodes. He's still currently making episodes. They're between like 20 and 30 minutes long. So he's an older dude. He's like in his 70s. He's traditionally published, and I think there's a few episodes where he was talking about stuff that had to do with like querying or whatever. It was geared more toward traditional publishing, but you could tell that he loves writing. He loves literature. He will read excerpts from literature. He will read quotes from other writers. I enjoy him. I think listening to him, I almost feel like I'm in a college class listening to a professor teaching me about writing. Like, he gives off that vibe. So an example of the next episode is Get Inside a Villain's Mind. Things like that. He's just helping authors with the whole process of creating a book from start to finish. And that's the kinds of episodes you're going to get with him. Anyways, those are my favorite podcasts for writers. If you found this video useful, like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Later.